Good afternoon po, Doc.
Good afternoon, Mark.
Could you please tell us about yourself po?
Well, puti na buhok. I'm a surgeon. Retired na, knowing of my age. And fascinated sa lahat. I am very meticulous in everything that I do. I failed, but I still have to improve. And anything like this is one of the things that I got interested to. I'm not a historian. I'm a neophyte, greenhorn researcher, and few of history. Ang aking kwan lang, ang difference sa akin is that when I see something, I have to see if that's right or wrong because of what you call reference of whatever I say on this, especially on this book. It's very important because my word is immaterial, does not carry anything, but those words I referred to in my book are authorities or historians to that effect, and special historians to the topics that I got involved in, which is Magellan and Pigafetta. So, yeah, when I talk about myself, it's an open book. It's an open book, and ganun lang. And kaya sabi ko nga is, when you say something, I find out if it's right or wrong. And if I say it right, then I say, I'm sorry. But if I say it wrong, then you'll get the hit. Not against me, but because of the people that wrote about things of the past. Mm-hmm.
Doc, since you're since you're claiming from the side of Butuan po, are you a Butuanon po?
No. I am an Ilocano. I was born in Ilocos. I got affinity, my affinity to Butuan was quite a long history because my father was assigned as a justice of the peace in the mountains of Agusan Sur in the late 1930s. So I was born 1941, and I was in Ilocos up to grade 3, and then I get my grade 4, 5, and 6 in the mountains of Agusan Sur with my parents. Kaya I stayed longer, of course, in Agusan Sur or Butuan than in Ilocos. Kaya I have more affinity to friends, knowledge of that particular area than Ilocos. Mm.
How about your educational background po, Doc?
I finished my medical school of Doctor of Medicine at Manila Central University in 1965. So from there, I went into the States and got my specialty in surgery and colorectal surgery at Temple University in Philadelphia. And then we got back here in 1973, just before the martial law. Just before the martial law. So I got all the experiences of things then, the good and the bad, and the bad and the bad.
So going back po, what made you interested po about researching the first mass in the Philippines?
Well, in the early 70s, during the time when the city was talking about draining up, flooding, and at that time there were attempts to improve the drainage system of Butuan by the district engineer, a city engineer. During the excavation, they excavated a lot of Chinese relics, Chinese ceramics, bronze, And of course, the thing that got a high peak was the discovery of the Balanghay. So that's about 1970s. And at that time, I was offered some artifacts. Ang una ko talaga naman is, it was a Spanish soldier, a statue, which was taken from the old, we call Masaw, a Spanish soldier and a Portuguese statue. And I just left it there. I didn't get interested. And it came to the point that there were already controversies, but I never minded it. But looking into the approaching 500 years, I said, well, in 5, 4, 6 years, there's already a sort of a quincentennial. So I got friends who are very interested. And one friend of mine was particularly interested because he has a half brother who in the early 70s discovered a marker on a stone, on a boulder, on top of a mountain in Agusan Norte. We call it Mount Minasog. So, looking into his research through his brother, he got a lot of things which is very relevant to that history. One thing is that they wanted to keep it quiet on their own. And in fact, in the early 80s, they got himself into some form of a conference, involved in the conference, and they presented their position in Butuan. They call that the 1980 NHI conference in Kovlandia. That's where he got interested. So, about 5 years ago, talking with the brother of because he died about in the late 80s. So the contact that I have now is with the brother. So I got interested on that boulder. We climbed it. We went. In fact, I climbed that 4 times. It's about 1,400 feet above sea level through a rough terrain, about more than 45 degrees. Okay? So I saw stones. Now, I went into the middle of the controversy now with the Limasawa groups. No? So from there, I visited Limasawa and got into where it's supposed to be. And then we went to what we call the Magallanes Line in Limasawa, which is in the Barangay Magallanes. Of course, during my tour in Europe, you see things, no? Historical, just like the Helen of Troy, no? In Turkey, we went that fortress, and during that time, the fortress, centuries before, was on the seashore. When we were there is still the broken palace, but the seashore now was about 12 miles away. No. So this is relevant. I found this relevant, I said, because in Butuan, there's no island. So the Limasasan and the historians in the early part of the 20th century, no, you don't have an island. There's none. So they focused themselves to an island, which is Limasawa. And it's an island. I said, really? So I have to, no? But the most important thing about this thing, as I said, for the past 5 years, I went deeply into the history, through history of Magellan and Pigafetta, using the Blair Robertson. And Blair Robertson and Albo and the Magellan's orders and negotiations and several sources. Kaya we have a barangay, Masao, in Butuan. Why is it relevant? There's a barangay Masao, it's not Masawa, and there's a Limasawa, which is an island, di ba? Deep into the research, sabi ko, looking into a map that I have in 1683, there was an island by the Recoletos, because the Recoletos were assigned. There were two orders. One is Jesuits, and then the Recoletos. Jesuits were there in Butuan 1594. The Recoletos went to Butuan in 1620s. Now there is this map of the Recoletos in 1682, which there is an island right at the mouth where Butuan is, because now there's no more island. Then it's a confluent line, landmass, and said this could have been the Masao or the Masawa referred to by Magellan. Why? I think I've analyzed that in my book. Most of the historians of the Limasawa always talk about Blair Robertson, that said that it's an Albo, Francisco Albo's log. And they said that this is the new discovery, which was against the Butuan claim favoring Limasawa. There is this misconception of theirs. In the Blair Robertson book, there's a preface. In the Pigafetta manuscript, there's a preface by Blair. Whoever did that, there were 3 editors: Blair, Alexander Robertson, Emma Blair, Alexander Robertson, and Bourne, a 3rd one. And I said, oh, so this is it. That's 1907. Good enough that I have a typeset book by Robertson himself. Blair was not there, even Bourne. In that preface, he even Robertson even thanked Blair in helping prepare the 1907 book. In that 1905 preface, it's different from that preface on that 1907. Why? Because there is in that 1907 the word Limasawa and open and close parenthesis Masawa. In the typeset, there's no such thing. It did not talk about the voyages in that 19. While in that 1907, they talk about superficially the voyage, which is quite different. So that was a big matter that has to be understood by historians. Preface is not part of Pigafetta's manuscript, so that you have to read the Pigafetta manuscript. In fact, Blair Robertson is not in favor of Limasawa. A lot of my reference in that book is from Blair Robertson, even in that cover. In that cover, it's Blair Robertson. What does it say? You want me to read it? Very clear. Maliit lang. the Butuan worthy of eternal memory and thanks, as they were Tislo, they were the first among whom the Catholic arms found shelter. Come down from the village and river of Butuan, the coast which looks to the north from Mindanao. It was the first soil where the famous Magallanes planted the domination of Jesus Christ. Blair Robertson, page 312, volume 40. Nothing in the actual Blair Robertson, any quote that says about Limasawa. I have several. Now, but more important, because they talk about, if you know, Francisco Collins and Francis Combes. These are historians in the 1660s and 1663. In their presentation, when I say there, the Limasawa proponents, they avoided a historian, also a Jesuit priest. In the 1594, who already narrated that there were flagellations and Lent celebration in Butuan that early. So, very important to do research. On the same book na sinasabi niya, I hope you don't mind, you can go through several references that I used Blair Robertson. Now, what they avoided to mention, because they always talk only of Pigafetta, at the end Pigafetta. Remember, there were negotiations. You have to remember that Magellan was a Portuguese. And he went to Spain just because the King Manuel of Portugal refused to sponsor his trip to the Spice Island through the western route because sabi niya, nandyan na ako eh. I mean, he already had the eastern route occupying the Moluccas. Diba? But more than, that was the final crux that really decided for him to go to Spain. But King Manuel refused to give him a half ducat of salary increase. That's only about less than $75. Yeah, kasi gamit ka na. Parang ganon. Gamit ka na. No advantage. Because he was already limping. And he was already about 35 to nearly 40 years old. Hindi na papakainin. Kasi lahat na page ng mga kings, libre pag board and lodging and salary. We're talking about, he was there, page maliit pa. But he went to Africa, went to India, and then to the Malacca in the 1511, di ba? So there were voyages that he sacrificed himself, mortally wounded, not mortal, he was wounded and limping. Kung King Manuel, kung gamit na ka, hindi na kakala. No, he was not given. So during their negotiation, talagang ayaw papahalik ka kamay. Yeah, because reverence yan sa king. He refused to offer his hand. Insulto yon. So tugon na, sige, he asked permission if he can go to another country to offer his services. So sabi ni King Manuel, oh, go ahead. Diba? Go ahead. Of course, he was determined. So, he went to Spain and offered.
Doc, what was your basis po in identifying Butuan as the site of the first mass? And where did your sources come from po?
Even in the Butuan proponents, is it Butuan or was it in Masawa or Masaw. Very important is the narration itself by Pigafetta. What are these narrations? These narrations involve the identity of the first king and the second king. That was exposed during the dawn of Saturday, where the celebration was held. These were detailed in the activities of Magellan and the rest of the parties during the early morning, but more so in the late afternoon, morning and afternoon, and up to Wednesday of April. From there, it identified who to whom Magellan and Pigafetta and the interpreter were talking to. Was it the first king or the second king? That's very important. Now, there are two kings. One is King Siawi, Siaui, whose domain was Masawa, and another king, Ray Colombo, whose domain was Butuan Caragan. Very clear who was the first king and second king. Okay, now, during the late morning, through the interpreter, Magellan asked him why there was so little to eat there. So, the king replied. He raised his hand and said, because we don't live here, we only come here to hunt and meet his brother. But I live in another island with my family. Very clear. Who was the one who answered it? It was the first king. Because that after they were already celebrating. And during that celebration, as I said in the late morning, the first king was the one who answered. Now, they were supposed to leave Monday morning. But the king said, that's a Sunday night. Oh, don't leave. You have to postpone your trip. Because I want to harvest my rice for them. Now, who ordered Magellan? Hoy, huwag kayo muna umalis. Don't leave. Because I'll do harvesting of my rice. And at the same time, send me some of your men to help me harvest. It was again the first king. First king, domain, Butuan. I just don't know. Okay? Kaya doon ko nahuli. When they said that, decided na. I'm sure you read it. Decided na, 1980, Limasawa. Gangkay ko, Limasawa. Legarda, Limasawa. Mojares, Limasawa. There was no reason for us to change because for the past 3 panel reports, it was all Limasawa. I was lucky enough to review all these panel report. Let's start with the 1980. Again, the Butuan group, I was not there. 1980, I was not interested. So they presented their position. This is their position. No? Surprising, their position was Masawa. not Butuan. Although they admit that their king is Ray Colombo. So kaya sabi ko nga sa kanila, no, let's correct this. We're referring to 1521, not 2020 or 20. Who was the king then was not King Colombo, was not the king of Masao, but he was the king. Although Masao now is part of Butuan, that doesn't change the history. That now that Masawa is now part of Butuan, the king then in 1521 was Colombo. No, that's a wrong reference. Now, so the Limasawa group said was criticizing a reference that the Butuan used, which is very important. That is the seizure of the Trinidad. Okay? They referred them to a different volume. Of course, they were wrong. I have the reference of that Captain Brito, who was the governor of Tidor. From him himself, he said that during that time, for 3 or 4 months before, nakaalis yung Victoria. Hindi niya nahuli. Nahuli niya yung Trinidad kasi leaking already. And they had an accident, so they had to repair it, and then he got hold of that boat, the Trinidad. Very important yun. Okay? Why? Because Trinidad was the flagship of Magellan. The flagship of Magellan. In that boat were also records of another sailor, Andres de San Martin. Okay? 2 documents were seized. One is that of San Martin, where he lagged where they went was 9 degrees. Now, 9 degrees, he said, Masawa. In the Trinidad, they seized the documents of Magellan. This document was very important, and I was the only one who brought this up. This was the order of King Charles to Magellan that the voyage to the land of spice must be under guise. What does it mean? Yung pupuntahan mo, huwag mo sasabihin kung saan. Itago mo. No? Because if you go into the orders or contract between King and Magellan, it was both of conquest, owning lands. After the 6 islands that you discover, nagsimula siya sa Guam to ika-6 sa'yo. Now, in addition was, doon sa mga lands na mapuntahan nyo, the group, ito si King Charles, ito naman magkasa kontratasyon. Kasa kontratasyon was the office where all voyages in and out of Spain are registered. All documents about voyages of this nandun sa kanila. Ang isang order doon nga sabi nga, if make peace or trade with the king of Raya or king of the land of spice. But number 2 is, if you see voyages, ships from Spain, from the Moors, Muslim, or Portuguese ships, ask them to leave. Ang purpose nitong mga Limasaw proponents, 9 and 2/3 yan ang pinuntahan. Kayo yung lang yung total ni Pigafetta, yun talagang pinuntahan. So, kasi yan ang purpose ni Magellan na pumunta sa 9 and 2/3. So ngayon, 9 and 2/3, sabi niya ngayon ito, sandali muna. kayo mga cartographers or your map makers, Limasawa is nearer 9 2/3 than Butuan nearer 9 2/3. So, Limasawa. With the purpose na yung 9 2/3 was openly exposed na ito yung land of spice. Is it the land of spice?